If you've played games like Fallout New Vegas, Knights of the Old Republic, or was really introduced to gaming through Planescape, you already know the characters in those games are different. And of course, by different, I mean better. Chances are those are the characters you've either loved or hated. They were the brainchild of Obsidian's own Chris Avellone. Thank you, Chris, for joining the show.
Hey, thank you very much, Andy. Appreciate being on.
I know you are quite busy right now. What are some of the projects you're working on?
Well, my time's divided between two projects right now. One is Obsidian's Project Eternity, which is kind of like a throwback to the old Infinity Engine games like Baldur's Gate that we used to do back at Black Isle. And the other game that I'm working on is Torment Tides of Numenera, which is a game that's being produced by inXile. And both of those were funded through Kickstarter.
Now, with the Torment Kickstarter, you were actually a stretch goal. That's something you don't normally see, in this odd world of Kickstarter. What do you hope to bring to this new revival to a great classic game?
Well, first off, it was kind of interesting being dubbed like a human stretch goal.
Yeah.
So I think a number of my friends I don't know if they're even going to call it my name anymore as much as the stretch goal. But yeah, on the Torment title, I'm hoping to bring a number of things to it. One is I wanted to be a part of the sort of overall design process and sort of offer my thoughts for, hey, where the Torment brand can go. I was the lead designer of Torment way back in 1999, and the chance to work on it again has been pretty thrilling. So I'd like to be able to share my thoughts in that respect. And then I also had the opportunity to design one of the companion characters for the game, which is something that I really enjoy doing from a design perspective.
Now, we're still obviously right out of the gate. The Kickstarter for that literally just finished, I think, last week or the week before that. From what you've seen so far, from what you've been able to be a part of, is it going for that authentic sort of Planescape experience? Does it seem like it's going to be able to capture what made that game so great at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. They've assembled a great team of writers for the project, which I think is important for a title like Torment. They've got Brian Matsuda, who's working on Dead State. They have some of my old colleagues, Tony Evans, Kevin Saunders, and even Colin McComb, who was one of the designers, one of the first designers actually on the first Torment game. And that's just a few of the lineup they have. They've got Mur Lafferty, they've got Monty Cook, who contributed to the Planescape setting back at TSR and Hasbro. And also, I believe that they also have Pat Rothfuss, actually. How could I possibly forget that name? He's the author of this book, Name of the Wind. It's a whole series that's actually pretty cool. And Colin met him at a conference. They got to talking. Apparently he's a huge Torment fan, so they invited him on board as a stretch goal, and he's all signed up and good to go.
And just for a quick plug, check out our March 28th show where we talk to Brian Fargo in depth all about Planescape. If the word Planescape right now you're listening and it sounds confusing, you don't need to listen to that show, and we talk for about an hour about everything you need to know. Maybe just from you, Chris, a brief sort of summary of what that sort of game is for someone who is not aware and what they could possibly expect if they are a contributor to the Tides of Numenera Kickstarter.
With the Torment Tides of Numenera, it's basically going to be a very strong story experience for a game. There's certainly a lot of game mechanics, combat, other things you would expect from a standard role-playing game. But what sets the Torment series apart is that there's a very strong focus on the characters, the interactions, sort of the underlying themes that take place in the game. It was very important in the first Torment game that we did, and the team understands that needs to be carried through in the second installment. And so far, they're showcasing a pretty good job.
And again, that's just starting right now, but you have been hard at work, as you said, on Project Eternity. And that's another Kickstarter project there. What is the state of the game right now?
Right now, we're working on our second prototype for Eternity. What we've tried to do is we want to do our due diligence and making sure that all the game mechanics are fun and things like being able to control your party is satisfying, the interface feels good, and all the basic mechanics for how the player navigates the environment, camera controls, all of those things are being proven out in these test beds called prototypes. We did a first prototype where we proved out a lot of the movement, combat, a lot of sort of the A priority stuff. And now we're currently working on the second prototype, which features a number of exterior areas, a certain village, quest lines for the player to go through, and basically a lot more meat to it.
And you've been a part of, like we said, several Kickstarter projects. How have you liked the process? What are, in your mind, some of the upsides and downsides of going through this method of funding and creating a game?
I love working on Kickstarter projects for a whole bunch of reasons. First off, you're allowed to have a lot more open communication with the fan base, and you're able to share things like the vision design documents with them, how you build levels, show them how you prototype levels. Some of that stuff, when working with the normal publisher model, isn't always allowed to do. With Kickstarter, you can pretty much share whatever you want with the public, take their feedback, iterate in certain mechanics, and sort of make them more part of the process. But that's only one of the things. The other thing is, what I like about Kickstarter is it gives you 30 days to see if your idea is actually something that the public would want to buy in the first place. And I think that's a much better funding model rather than funding a game for 2 years and then trying to market at the end to try and make people buy it. I think the fact that the Kickstarter has that 30-day process where you prove out your idea, see how much traction you get with it, I think ends up being a more satisfying experience. It sort of lets you know if your idea is really good out the gate. And it certainly was the case with Eternity and Torment and Wasteland 2.
Now, have there been any downsides, though, of going through this method as opposed to the more traditional way of making games?
Not yet. The only minor drawbacks that I can think of is it's caused us to have to focus a little bit more on community management and sort of forum management. There's a lot of infrastructure that has to be set up with backer portals, making sure PayPal is all set up and good to go, setting up sort of the media updates and sort of the marketing push for regular updates on the product, messages to the backers, handling all the reward tiers. So there's a little bit more production overhead, but overall, so far, there hasn't actually been any negatives. The fact that you get all your funding up front and then you can sort of plan the game based on that budget is actually kind of refreshing versus the publisher model of getting paid every month for a certain delivery of features, which can change over time. With Kickstarter, I feel like a little bit more control over the process.
Have there been circumstances, because you talked right there, of the importance of communication? And I just think of people who are making games and in that position where a small portion of a contributor base could have been perhaps the loudest and really advocated against certain features in a game and affect the development process. Has that been the case? Have you seen that to actually happen within the project you've been working on, or is it more even keel of what people are asking for?
I think the only thing that I've ever noticed is that there was one point on Wasteland 2 where they brought out the idea of possibly doing some more socially integrated features, and the fan base did mention that they did not like having that feature added. I don't know what percentage of the fan base that was, but it did allow the developers to realize, hey, we don't have to spend programmer time and resource time on this because they've indicated that they don't want that feature in the game. And no one was loudly proclaiming it or fighting for it. So that's another reason I like a Kickstarter, is because you have that forum for early implementable features. You can decide whether you can actually sort of poll the community and say, hey, is this something that you would actually like to see in the game? And if not, then you can save everybody a bunch of time and grief by not devoting any programming resources to it, design resources, and just focus back on the things that people are really responding to.
That's always the, I think, most perplexing thing to people when we're talking all about Kickstarter, is that the people who are making these games, they actually want to hear from you. They actually want to know what you think about the game and how they would iterate it to make it differently. And like you're saying here, there have been circumstances where you directly have taken that insight and it's affected what the final product's going to be.
Yes. And the thing is, because we have that level of open communication and we can get a sense from the fan base for things that they want to see, I think that just ends up creating a stronger product that actually satisfies our audience more. So, again, that's another thing that I just really enjoy about Kickstarter.
Well, I know we are pretty far into the production of Project Eternity. What is that final product going to look like in your eyes? What's the vision of that game going to be when it finally does ship out for all the contributors who jumped aboard?
It's going to be a more modern interpretation of the old Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, Planescape Torment style games, which is you are looking down on an isometric battlefield. You can control up to 6 players in tactical combat. You go exploring a lot of very beautifully painted and constructed dungeons. And also you have a lot of very deep interactions with the characters in the environment and also the companions that can join your party. All of those pillars are very important to us, and we thought that's kind of the game that we want to create with Eternity. And I think the way things are going, we're well on the way to that goal.
Why do you think there has been the success of these sort of revivals of classic games that don't have the perhaps most updated and ridiculous graphics of other games in the time? Why are these finding so much success through Kickstarter?
I think just because people look back on having played those games in the past, they really enjoyed them. They really enjoyed them at the tech level that they were made at that time, and they have really fond memories of them. And I imagine a number of them just miss seeing titles like that made, so much so that when the opportunity presents itself to fund it, they'll be willing to contribute either the price of the game or far more beyond the price of the game just to see a product like that. Like, I think that proved out with Double Fine's, the Double Fine adventure as well on Kickstarter. People had not seen an adventure game in a very, very long time. And so when the opportunity came up for Tim Schafer to go, you know what, I think I'll just go directly to the public and see if they'd be willing to finance an adventure game. And sure enough, they did. So I guess the reason that they have such appeal when they're put up on Kickstarter is that people remember playing titles like that, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. They have really fond memories of Baldur's Gate. They have fond memories of Icewind Dale, of Planescape Torment. And there's really not many games out in the marketplace like that nowadays. Like, publishers don't tend to produce titles like that because they don't generate the same level of revenue as, say, more of their AAA titles for consoles or, whatever platform they're focusing on. And also, so when Kickstarter fires one of these projects up, it gives the public and the players, even if it's a small percentage of the gaming community, a chance to sort of contribute and donate to see a game that they want to see play, that they remember fondly. They don't need, like, a bunch of bells and whistles for, like, the latest absolute graphics, or they don't need, voice acting for every single character. They recognize that there was something intrinsically fun about the basic experience that they're willing to fund and put their dollars towards. And it may not be numbers that a publisher is comfortable with. Like, even if we have 70 or 80,000 backers, like 70 or 80,000 people purchasing a game nowadays is actually just a drop in the bucket compared to what publishers are shooting for. But for a Kickstarter, that's more than enough to fund a Baldur's Gate style game, and that's what we're shooting for with Project Eternity.
Well, it's excellent, too, because, again, for people like me and, again, the 70,000 who appreciate that, they want a game like this. They need it, and that's why they give their money. Is it a more difficult pitch for those who perhaps haven't played the game before?
I think it is. So one of the things that was interesting about Kickstarter is they told us that necessarily it wasn't always the product that you're selling. Sometimes it's the story that you're selling with the product. And I think that came out pretty apparent in Wasteland 2. Like, I honestly don't know how many people who contributed to Wasteland 2 had actually played the first game. But there were two things about the Wasteland 2 campaign that I think people did understand. And one was, here's a type of game that's too difficult to get funded through publishers and still remain true to its vision. So people recognized, hey, we're supporting the underdog here. And the second thing was, it was a very old-school role-playing game. And an old-school role-playing game, regardless of whether it's set in post-apocalyptic America or whether it's high fantasy, that's something they hadn't seen in a while. So those two hooks ended up being something people could latch on to and understand that, hey, when you're supporting this project, here's what you're getting for your money.
Especially because, just adding to that, my own assessment, when you're only needing to contribute a few dollars to get the basic product, and you can still do, as you said, help the underdog at the time when perhaps in the industry there was sort of antipathy towards major publishers and their kind of effects on gaming. Now Kickstarter gives a chance for people to do that when they didn't beforehand. And like you said, you've had great success to make the games in your vision of how you want them to be, in the vision of fans. But if this was related to a published title of how many people are backing it, it would be abysmal, right?
Yes, 70,000 sales for a title would be considered a failure.
Kind of, again, it ties into that sort of notion that this is a new way of making games. Do you think this will become more of a standard, or is this works for the niche products that you and a few developers make so well?
You know, if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have been pretty uncertain. I was wondering if, you know, people would start getting exhausted of Kickstarter, if it would be harder for projects to get funded, if there was only a certain level of funding that you could get. But a few things happened that kind of changed my mind and gave me a lot of hope that maybe this could become the future way of funding. One was I started to notice that the Kickstarter funding levels, rather than necessarily going down for RPG products, have actually been going up, which is something that I wasn't expecting. But like the Tides of Numenera project, you know, went well over think about $4.3 million, which I, you know, would surprise me because I wasn't sure if, you know, people would continue to contribute, but they did. And then there's been other game products that even have gone beyond that. And then I noticed that a number of high-profile movie projects are also started to be done on Kickstarter, like the Veronica Mars movie project, for example. That got a considerable amount of backing. So I think that people may actually be becoming more comfortable with using Kickstarter as a funding model. And if that's the case, then we might actually be able to go directly to customers with products they may want to see, rather than going through a publisher or a middleman to try and figure out what the public wants. So I think it's pretty encouraging for the future. And I'm actually expecting that in the days to come, the actual Kickstarter funding model is actually going to start generating higher and higher ceilings as people become more comfortable with it.
And again, that is what we have our prophecy from Chris Avellone himself, that we're going to see more of this. We're talking to Chris all about the projects he's working on, Tides of Numenera, Project Eternity. Is there anything you can talk about the South Park game that Obsidian's working on? I know this is a big turn of the classic old-school Kickstarter gaming that we're talking about. Is there any insights of how the development of that product's going?
You know, I wish I could talk about South Park, but the only thing I could ever really say is that whenever we've been in design meetings with the show's creators, Matt and Trey, whenever they get really excited about a quest line or a certain part of the storyline, they'll start acting out the characters' voices
really?
In the quest right in front of us.
Hey, wait a minute. You're just a kid.
Maybe this would teach you to listen to authority.
Ow! 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 Hey, man, what are you doing? Ow, stop it!
Sometimes I wish we just had a recorder turned on for that, because it's some of the funniest stuff I think I've ever heard in a design meeting in my life.
See, that's the sort of stuff that we need to get on some sort of DVD to come with the game, because I guarantee that will sell a lot of collector's editions, just that feature alone.
That would be beautiful.
Well, and I know you can't, just again, stop me if you can't, but you're developing characters that are already really established, which is very different from what Obsidian's done in the past with this game in South Park. What are some of the difficulties of that? Because like you said, Trey and Matt are there. They have these amazing established characters that have been around for over a decade now. Is it just working in with the systems that they already believe work, or talk through that process a bit if you can?
Well, largely, Obsidian recognizes that, you know, Matt and Trey understand South Park better than anybody else. So we let them deal with how they want the characters to interact with the environment, how they want the characters to sound, situations they want the characters to be in, and we just try and do whatever we can to facilitate the process and make sure we can develop a game based on that. And it's not a difficult process at all, because I think Matt and Trey play a lot of games, and they have really humorous insights on a lot of the games that they play that I think are going to come out in the South Park game as well. But I wish I could speak more to it, but that's about all I can say right now.
Now, I know at the top of the show we talked all about Obsidian's characters, their NPCs. What brings to mind is the previous game, one of the most recent games, is Fallout New Vegas. And the characters there are they're plainly different. They're more complex, they're more interesting, and they're just more multifaceted than you see in other games. Like I said before, talking to people like Fergus, like Josh Sawyer, they all say that you are very much the brainchild of a lot of that complexity. Can you talk to us a little bit about what makes Obsidian characters different?
Well, they're certainly being very flattering towards me. I would probably turn the compliment back to them and say they've created an environment where sort of creating those types of characters is a much more appreciated art in the industry, which I think results in a lot of the complexity that you're seeing. The way we approach characters at Obsidian is we try and examine the actual game mechanics of the title, and then just try and make sure that all the characters and companions that you can meet in the adventure actually help complement that. And what I mean by that is we look at things like, hey, New Vegas has a brand new reputation system where, depending on how you treat different factions, that's going to change like the dynamics of the wasteland. Once we know that's going to be one of the game mechanics, then we want to make sure that, number one, like all the companions that you deal with have very distinct reactions to those reputation shifts, so they're actually complementing the system mechanics. And then on top of that, you want to make sure that they actually have really good background and sort of perspectives on each of the factions in the game. So they have actually solid, grounded reasons for why they may not like Caesar's Legion or why they may favor Caesar's Legion, what their feelings are about, another faction like the New California Republic. It's important to us that their reasons for feeling that way feel convincing to the player and also fit in well with the world. Also, we recognize that all the companions in our game should also help reinforce the theme that we're going for as well. So a lot of the elements that we're trying to explore in New Vegas, we try and make sure the companions that journey with you can sort of act as sounding boards for the themes that are being presented and talk with you about them. You're allowed to offer your own opinions on them. And even though that doesn't give you like any experience points, or it's not like having like a combat with a death claw, the fact that the player has the option to explore these bonus and optional nodes where they can sort of discuss their feelings in a certain event or a certain situation in the wasteland, we think that gives those characters a certain amount of depth too. So those are things that are really important to us because we want you to feel like you're adventuring with a group of your buddies or someone who can challenge you on your viewpoints and sort of give you something to think about beyond the game.
Caesar's dead. Bet he didn't see this coming when he was having his coffee this morning. Still, it's not going to stop the Legion. It might not even slow them down.
Well, yeah, what you just spoke to right there, I love that, and we're going back to Fallout New Vegas as the example here. There's one instance that comes to mind that when you play the game differently, you'd almost never experience. And I love the fact of, what brings to mind, of Boone, when you do take him to go to Caesar's Legion to actually fight Caesar, as you say. It's not something that I don't think a lot of gamers had the chance to perhaps be a part of. And if you do, it's one of the most resonating and wonderful experiences of that game. Is there a lot of those instances where you know that a very small portion of the people who are going to play this game are actually going to get this experience and you still make it as robust? Does that come into effect when you're developing?
That's very much our intention, and that's exactly because you told me about that event just now. Because that event resonated with you and we thought it would make a good scene, even if we recognize that not everyone would be able to experience it, the fact that you were able to have that experience and not everybody else was, we think makes it even more powerful. And so it's a conscious decision when designing that there are going to be things that not every player is going to hit, but that's the nature of role-playing. Like, we want every player adventuring through the game to have a different experience based on their choices, based on their character build, or depending on whatever faction or companion they choose to associate with. And the example that you just did with Boone, that's an important one.
Again, excellent. And this kind of goes into the next assessment of gaming in DLC and the effective way that Fallout New Vegas integrated new DLCs that are very varying in tones and always gave different assessment to the main story. What makes a good DLC in your mind?
Got a message for you. Come find me. You know the way. Bring all your weapons. Bring your convictions. Your flag of the bull. Two-headed bear. Or whatever flag you're carrying now.
The approach that we used with the DLCs in New Vegas was we recognized that while people still want a number of the core mechanics that they experience in the main game, like, exploring the wasteland, seeing what the world is like after nuclear war, having little dungeons, encounters based on that, we also recognized that players were largely there for the story and the narrative and getting a perspective on that narrative as well. So what we wanted to do for the DLCs, we're like, well, you know what? The storyline of New Vegas does come to a definite end. So if we want to add more narrative content, which we think players really appreciate, what direction do we go with the DLCs to try and enrich the player's narrative experience? So we ended up going backwards and going, you know what happened to the character before he actually started New Vegas, and what sort of adventures and situations resulted from that. And we thought it was a compelling hook to go, you know what, as a player, you have sort of a selfish interest in trying to figure out why all these events are happening. Even though they may seem unrelated, they all seem tied to one event in the past or one figure in the past, and it's a mystery that hopefully we're compelling players to want to solve. So that was sort of our approach with the DLC. We wanted to give the players sort of a narrative hook to lure them in there, and then give them a sense that, you know what, every action you take in the Mojave Wasteland could have tremendous consequences for someone else or potentially hundreds of other people.
Going into that, within Fallout New Vegas, Old World Blues and what that contributed to the story, the tone is just something you don't see in games. It's absolutely unflinchingly hilarious. What was the decision to go with? You still get the information, like you said, you're still contributing to the main story and getting more information about who you are as the courier. But with that particular DLC in question, why make that decision to completely have a shift in tone and create something that when you think of a game like Fallout New Vegas, you'd never expect to be a part of it, but works so well? Why try and go for this real alternative sort of story?
Now it's holding up an array of fully erect hand penises. If it tries to insert them, activate vivisectors.
Dr. Klein, wait. I don't believe those gestures were random.
Well, one of the things that I think makes a good DLC is that every DLC pack you turn out, not only do you want to have a new adventure or a new environment, but also I think it's important to deliver a new theme and a new tone with each DLC that comes out that goes beyond just the visuals. And Old World Blues was our take on, well, you know what, 1950s science fiction is very much a part of the Fallout franchise. Why don't we do a DLC that focuses on that while continuing the main storyline? And, you know, watching all the old 1950s movies like, you know, Brain from Planet Oros, you know, and all, you know, a whole, you know, like Forbidden Planet, like all of those things, all of that gave a pretty rich fuel for, you know what, we could probably do just about whatever adventure location we want in Old World Blues because we have this overall narrative that supports it. So why don't we all just have fun with this and recognize that that's the way these scientific experiments are playing out? And so, you know, we have the brains and the, you know, the jars, and then we have, you know, the
penis fingers quote comes to mind as well.
Yeah, it was. And you know what? We just me and the two other writers, Robert Lee and Travis Stout, we just sat down and go, you know what? You know, we want the characters to have distinct personalities, and we just want to make sure that the players just have a lot of fun interacting with them. So we just went all out and had a great time. And I'll be honest, I didn't think that DLC would be very well received, but I got the DLC of the year, and then I got a lot of really great reviews, and I'm really proud of it.
Absolutely, very well deserved. What do you feel about day one DLC and sort of the role of DLC in games that you guys aren't making?
I think DLC is intended to help continue the experience, and I think if there's a certain brand of DLC that the public is not responding well to, notably because like the day one format, I really think it's worth examining it from a developer or publisher standpoint to ask if you really need that or not. Ultimately, it's our job as developers to make the consumer happy. And if there are practices that are not making them happy, I think they really bear a careful examination and basically to ask the question, are those things really needed?
And just finishing up here, thank you again so much for taking the time to chat with us. What do you see the role of gaming as going forward?
I think my feeling is games are primarily meant as entertainment. while you can introduce themes, strong storylines, and I think they can help enrich the game experience, it's important to remember that games are designed to entertain. What's kind of interesting is that a lot of the more recent titles that I'm seeing coming out, they actually branch away from gameplay, or they put a focus on elements that I wouldn't consider standard gameplay. Like the Walking Dead game that came out last year, for example, is a very strong story and reactivity focus, but the actual game mechanics present in that title are actually very light, which is kind of interesting. And I had a blast playing it. I thought it was amazing, but I don't know if that would, if I would have considered that game to have been viable, 5 or 6 years ago. I wasn't sure if there was a place for a story-based game. And then you're seeing things like, Dear Esther come out, which is basically a 4-hour, interactive novel where you go through these levels and you experience the story visually. And there's no real gameplay associated with it, but you're basically just walking through an interactive experience, which is kind of an interesting take. So I'm really curious to see where games or sort of the interactive experience will go from this point, because I'm seeing a lot of sort of new permutations on things that I did not expect recently, and I'm kind of pretty hopeful about where it's going to go in the future.
Well, thank you so much. Chris Avellone from Obsidian Entertainment joining us. He's working on, again, Project Eternity, the Kickstarter project, Tides of Numenera. That's just finished. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I really appreciate it.
Andy Borkowski here, VGS.